everyone, and welcome. My name is Debbie, and I'm here with Nicole. Nicole, say hi to everybody. And we are educators at the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. And we really are excited to have you join us today for our virtual student program, Portrait Detectives. My role today is going to be as moderator. Now, while I can't hear or see you on this Zoom call today, I can see what you put into the chat function, and that's going to be how we communicate with you today. So just a quick review of how that all works. On the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see your Zoom toolbar, and in the middle, there's a chat button. When you click on that, you'll see a place where you can type and send me a message. And when I see it come through, I'll read it out to everybody, and that way we'll know what you're thinking. And we are excited to know what you're thinking. Nicole's going to be asking you a lot of questions today, and we need your participation. So feel free to chat your responses into the chat, and I will go ahead and make sure to read them to everyone. With that, we are ready to get started. I'm going to turn it over to Nicole, who has a great program for you today. Enjoy.
Great, thank you so much, Debbie. My name is Nicole, and I work as a gallery educator at the National Portrait Gallery. I just wanted to first say that although we are gathered from different places today, we gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. And I would really love to hear from you. I see some responses here in the chat. I see Alden, he's a second grader from Buffalo, New York. If you would like to share where you are from, your name, and if you'd like to share what grade you're in, that would be awesome. And I'm actually going to start sharing my screen so that we can mark where you are. So you'll see here on the screen a map of the United States. On the right-hand side, you'll see a star, and that represents Washington, D.C., where our museum is located, which you can see in the background behind me. Debbie, would you mind sharing some of the responses in the chat?
They're starting to come in. We have another friend joining us from Illinois.
Awesome. All right, so we'll draw a little star in Illinois. Excellent. Where else?
And don't forget Alden from Buffalo, New York.
Buffalo, New York. Excellent.
And it looks like our friends are thinking and finding the keyboard and getting set to type in their answers. Oh, here comes Cindy from Goldsboro, North Carolina.
North Carolina. Excellent.
We've also got Alfreda from the Chicago area joining us today.
All right, some more friends from Illinois. Excellent.
I'll let you know if anything else comes in, Nicole, if you want to start chatting.
Excellent. So you'll see that we are gathered near and far today. So I'd first like to talk about the building that you see behind me on my screen. And I'll stop sharing my screen so you can see the National Portrait Gallery. So like I mentioned earlier, our museum is located in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. It was originally built as the U.S. Patent Office building. That means that inventors would bring their models here to get them approved, to say that this is my idea for an invention and no one else can steal it. After many years, it turned into a hospital during the Civil War, and then an art museum in 1968, so about 50 years ago. And our museum's name is pretty unique, the National Portrait Gallery. And one word in that name tells us about the types of things we'll find in the museum. So I'd like for you to think about that word, portrait. And if you'd like to, in the chat, you can write what a portrait is, or if you're more comfortable, maybe turning to, if you have a friend or someone else in the room, maybe sharing with them what a portrait is. But a portrait is an artwork of a person. So you'll see here behind me on the screen, a portrait of George Washington. And today we are going to look at many, many, many portraits. And we are going to be what I like to call portrait detectives. So we will be searching for clues in these portraits that tell us about the sitter. And the sitter is just the person who's being painted or sculpted, who's in the portrait. An artist can use a lot of different materials or mediums Mediums just means the different types of art. So it could be a painting, a sculpture, it could be a video, a photograph, anything that shows what a person looks like is considered a portrait. So I'd like for us all to get out our magnifying glass or our telescope today. This is going to be what we're going to use to look closely at these portraits to uncover the clues that we see. Today, as detectives, we are going to be recording our clues or recording the things that we see down. So if you have a piece of paper next to you, or a pencil, I'd invite you to get those out right now. If you don't have those near you, or if they're in another room, you can just grab them. I'll wait for a few moments, but make sure you have some paper and a pencil. All right, so as we're waiting for some of our friends to gather their paper and pencils, I would like to introduce you to our first portrait today. So I'm going to share my screen again. We'll leave this map. And today we are using a learning lab collection. This is part of the Smithsonian's website, where you can find all of the objects at our museum. And this collection, or these artworks that are all grouped together, are really excellent tools for learning how to be a portrait detective. So we're going to first look at this portrait of former President Barack Obama. And I know that there were some of you who had mentioned that you are from Illinois. So you might be familiar with this sitter, this person that we see in the portrait. And what I'd like for us to do first is to really step into this portrait. So I'd like for us to get into the same pose. That means, the same body language as Barack Obama. So I'd like for you to cross your arms front of you. And if you notice, he's not leaning back in the chair, he's actually moving forward. So if you're sitting on a chair on your couch at home, if you get in the same pose, and as you're in this pose, I'd like for you to think about one word to describe Barack Obama's pose. So that word could be how he might be feeling, could be how he wants people to think that he's feeling. And if you could write that word in the chat, or if you're not comfortable typing in the chat, you can just say it out loud. All right. So I'm going to share what I see in his pose. Again, his arms are crossed. He's tilted forward. It looks like he's here for a long time. It looks like he's very, very comfortable. But not comfortable in the fact that he's leaning back in the chair. He is moving in as close to us as he can be. His eyes are looking straight out at us, which makes this portrait feel very, very personal. Maybe like we're having a conversation with a former president of the United States, Barack Obama. Debbie, were there any words that you noticed in the chat?
I didn't see any.
Okay, but I'm sure we have friends thinking out there. Excellent. All right, so we've talked about his pose, and that is a very, very important clue into understanding this portrait. So from his pose, we could learn that Barack Obama, he is a great listener, that he might be a good friend, that he is here sitting and listening and looking at us. Right, another one of the clues that we can find in this portrait is his clothing. Okay, so I want you to spend a few moments looking to what he is wearing. He has a black jacket over a white button-up shirt. If you notice, he also has some shoes, some black shoes, some socks, and even a watch and a ring on his hand. And as we look closely, a lot of this clothing is clothing similar to what many former presidents of the United States have worn, especially within the last several decades or years. But there might be something missing from his clothing. And if you think you have an idea of what that might be, you can write that in the chat.
Nicole, some of our friends are letting us know what they think, and Dylan wanted to tell us that he's not wearing a tie and his collar is open. I'm also seeing several other friends agreeing that no tie on President Obama really stands out.
Excellent. You are all wonderful portrait detectives. And I love how you found that there was something missing in this portrait, or maybe something that typically is there. So yes, Barack Obama, he's not wearing a tie. So if you think sometimes when people come home from work, they might take off their tie to show that they are a little bit more comfortable. So Barack Obama, he doesn't have this tie on to show that, yes, he's more comfortable, but also that he is a bit more casual or more like a friend in this portrait than a president of the United States. Those are excellent observations, portrait detectives. Okay, so we've talked about Barack Obama's pose. We've talked about his clothing. And these are two clues to understanding this portrait. One of the last clues that I'd like to focus on is the symbols, or those things that represent something else that we can find in the background. And once you have an idea on what maybe some of these symbols or these objects in the background might be, if you could write those in the chat, or if you're not comfortable writing in the chat, you can share it just out loud. All right, any friends in the
Yes,
chat,
a lot
Debbie?
of our friends from all over are noticing the flowers that are in the background. Oh, and a nice old wooden chair.
Excellent. All right. Excellent work, detectives. So we see this rich background of flowers and leaves and the chair. These are all excellent observations. All right, so these flowers are very important to understanding his story. And I'd like for us to look specifically to the different colors of flowers that we see. Okay, and once you have one of those colors identified, if you could write that in the chat. Looking at this portrait, I see 1, 2, 3, 4. I see almost 5 different colors.
Nicole, somebody noticed the chrysanthemums. They actually knew what kind of flower it was. And then we're getting all kinds of colors: purple, yellow, pink, and white. Oh, and you know what? Franklin from Chicago says we see purple and yellow. And I have another person identifying the flowers. Someone spotted the jasmine.
Excellent. I didn't know that in addition to portrait detectives, you are also botanists or florists. You're really familiar with flowers. You're exactly right. This portrait is full of pink and orange and yellow chrysanthemums. It's also full of white jasmine flowers. And these flowers tell us a lot about the places where Barack Obama has lived or his family has lived. So I'll start with those purple flowers that many of you recognize right from the start. So if you notice down by Barack Obama's feet, there are purple flowers. Those are African blue lilies, even though they're purple. And those are a flower that those are flowers that grow in Kenya, which is a country in Africa where Barack Obama's father was from. As we move up the canvas or up this artwork, you'll see that there's a lot of white flowers, and one of our scholars out there identified those as jasmine. And jasmine is grown in Hawaii, which is where Barack Obama was born and spent a lot of his childhood. All right, as we move further up, many of you recognize the chrysanthemums. And I know we have a lot of friends from Chicago. So I'm looking at you right now. Why is the chrysanthemum important to Chicago? Well, I'm sure many of you might know this who are living in Chicago, but the chrysanthemum is the official flower of the city. And Barack Obama, he spent a lot of his political or kind of his career in the government in Chicago. So the pink and orange flowers that we see to the side and on top of his head represent Chicago. You'll also notice another flower that's nestled in those leaves really far in the background that's really small and pink. How it's been explained to me is that those flowers are rosebuds. And while those rosebuds might not tell us where Barack Obama has lived or his family has lived, in art history, they are seen as a symbol, meaning they represent strength and courage. So the artist of this portrait, Kehinde Wiley, is showing us that Barack Obama is a strong and courageous individual. And Barack Obama, he was the first African-American president of the United States. And we are so glad that we have the opportunity to share this portrait with you. Some of our friends who are in Chicago, you will see this portrait within the next year or so. It'll be coming to your city. So I invite you to see it there. All right, well, detectives, we need to write down or draw the clues that we found in this portrait. So if I could have you pull out your pencil and paper, pen, marker, crayon, whatever you have, I'm going to pull out my digital detective notebook so that you can see a little bit more easily. And I'm going to choose to draw one of the flowers that I saw in the background because it told me about Barack Obama's life and where he lived. So I'm going to choose to draw a chrysanthemum flower. You could choose to draw a jasmine flower if you like those flowers, or the African blue lilies. But for a chrysanthemum flower, we're going to start with a lot of petals. And these look like really long almond shapes. We're going to do a lot of these radiating. That's meaning that they're all starting from the center and going out. And you'll notice my flower is not perfect. This is just a quick sketch so that we can remember that we talked about Barack Obama and we talked about the chrysanthemum flowers or any of the other flowers that represented the places in which he lived. And I wish I could have an opportunity to see all of your beautiful flowers that you're drawing, but I know that they're great portrait detectives because you've been making some excellent observations. All right, so Debbie, I'm gonna erase this flower. As I'm doing that, were there any other maybe questions or comments in the chat that we haven't addressed?
No questions, just some good comments saying people are having fun drawing along with you.
Oh, excellent. Well, we have several more opportunities to draw. All right, detectives, we are now going to move from Washington, D.C. and Chicago to California to look at our next portrait. So we're going to pan through all of these wonderful portraits at our museum to one that is fairly new to our museum. All right, and this portrait is of Julie Packard. Julie Packard might not be someone that we're as familiar with as Barack Obama. Maybe we don't see her face in the news as much as we see a president's face, but Julie Packard has also shaped the history and culture of the United States. And for this portrait, I'd like for us to play a little game, actually. It's called the 30-second look. So for this, I would like for us to get out our magnifying glasses or our telescopes, and I'd like for us to look as closely as we can at this portrait. That means from the top to the bottom, side to side, in all the corners. And I'm going to give you only 30 seconds to do this. All right, so I have your 30 seconds starting now. Okay, you have 10 more seconds to take in all of those details. All right, so friends, I'm going to stop sharing this portrait with you, and I'd like to hear from some of you if you'd like in the chat. So we had our sitter in the portrait, and what did you notice behind her? And if you could write those in the chat.
Nicole, we are getting a lot of responses, not just confined to what's behind her. So I think we should just open it up.
Okay.
Some of our friends are noticing that the sitter had white hair and wrinkles. Someone noticed that it looked like an aquarium. They're noticing seaweed, the fish, sharks, the glass panes in the background, as well as some of the plants like coral. And some are even noticing details about her body pose, that her arms are crossed, and some of the details of her clothing, like her scarf.
Excellent work, detectives. I love how you pulled all of those details from that portrait, from the coral or those sea plants behind her, to the fish, to the wrinkles in her skin and her white hair. Excellent, excellent work. All right, so we're going to go back to our portrait of Julie Packard. And I hope as we look at it again, there might be something that you didn't see before. So maybe one of our fellow portrait detectives pointed out something, maybe one of the fish or those glass panes that hold up the aquarium that you didn't see before. So this portrait is full of clues that help us understand Julie Packard's life story. Okay, thinking about what we see in the setting behind her, I'm going to ask a question. We'll come back to this at the end. But what do you think Julie Packard does for work? Okay, so you to maybe think about that. Once you have an idea, you're welcome to put that in the chat. But before we talk about that, I'd like for us to identify or to discuss a lot of the animals or the sea creatures that we see behind her. And if you look to the very, very top of the portrait, you'll notice 3 large fish called leopard sharks. So they're at the very, very, very top. As we move to the left side, we'll see that there is a sea bass. And then as we move further down through that kelp forest, we notice that there's some orange fish, and those are called Garibaldi fish. And Garibaldi fish, like the leopard sharks and the sea bass, they live in the Monterey Bay, which is located just off of the coast of California, so in the western United States. And we can't forget the large fish near her elbow that's pink and purple. That is a sheep's head fish, which is a fish that lives on the bottom of the ocean floor that loves to eat crustaceans. Crustaceans meaning crabs, or a lot of those sea creatures that really have really, really hard shells to protect them from fish, most of which are the sheep's head fish. All right, so Debbie, have there been any portrait detectives that have been able to solve this mystery of Julie Packard's career?
Well, I will say all the responses have one thing in common. They all have to do with protecting sea life and the aquarium. We have some people say she works in the aquarium. Some people say maybe she is a marine biologist. A few others just saying she's in charge there. So everyone's noticing her special relationship with those fish in the tank behind her.
Excellent work, detective. So we found ways in which Julie Packard is connected to the background behind her. That yes, she works at an aquarium. She actually was one of the founders, the creators of the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And she is standing in front of one of the most famous exhibits there on the sea kelp forest. And this is one of the only times in an aquarium where they've been able to create an entire kind of marine environment, from the sea kelp to all of the different fish and other creatures that live there. All right, so I'd like for us to look to how else Julie Packard is connected to the setting. And one of those ways, or one of those clues, is color. So I'd like for you in the chat to write, if you can, one word or one color that you see in this portrait that really dominates, or really you see everywhere in this portrait. And as you're doing that, I'm going to talk about Julie Packard's hair. If you notice, there are strands of purple and blue and green. Julie Packard doesn't have purple, blue, or green hair, although that would be really cool. Her hair is white, but the artist here is using a lot of the other colors that she finds in the setting to really connect Julie Packard to her work, to her passion. That means what she really, really loves. You'll notice that sheep's head fish by her elbow. That's one of the fish that Julie Packard, she spent a lot of her life researching. And when the artist finished this artwork, Julie Packard was looking at it and said, this is very, very beautiful, but I want you to change two things. First, I'd like for you to paint the sheep's head fish with sharper teeth, because Julie Packard, she knew that the sheep's head fish ate a lot of crustaceans that needed to have sharper teeth. And then she also asked the artist to make her hair a little bit more messy. Julie Packard said, when I'm at the aquarium or when I am out in the ocean, I have messy hair. It's usually tousled by the wind. And so she wanted the artist to change those two things. All right, but going back to my initial question about the colors that you see in this portrait, Debbie, what were some of the colors that our detectives uncovered?
Well, as you mentioned, Nicole, this is a really colorful portrait, and our detectives noticed turquoise. They noticed blue, orange, whites, and greens. A shout out to Franklin and the first graders that said blue, orange, white, and green all together. And they're using great words like shades of blue and shades of green. So they're noticing they're not all the same.
Excellent. All right. You are great portrait detectives and artists, using a lot of these words to describe the setting. All right. So detectives, you know the drill now. We are now going to draw one of the clues that tells us a lot about Julie Packard.
Hey, Nicole,
Oh, yes.
Nicole, before we get to that, we do have a question. Someone's asked you to tell us more about the pin on her scarf. They're noticing that pin.
All right, excellent observation, portrait detective. So that pin that we see on Julie Packard's scarf, I'll actually zoom in here a little bit so we can see it better. So you notice she has this pin or this brooch that is attached to her scarf. And you'll notice it's a circle. And this is the logo or the symbol that represents the Monterey Bay Aquarium. Which looks like either a shell or the waves crashing down on the seashore. So great work, detective, on pulling out that clue. All right, so detectives, if I could get you to pull out your detective notebook and pencil, I am going to draw a Garibaldi fish. And if you want to draw your own fish, that is okay too. But I'm going to first start with a shape with my fish. Sorry, I need to get all of my art supplies in order. I'm going to first start with a circle for the body of the fish. You'll notice the orange fish that are near Julie Packard's shoulders are pretty circular. And then we will draw the fins on the fish to help them swim through this kelp forest. So we'll draw two triangles that are connected to the circle. And we'll draw a triangle on the top and a smaller triangle on the bottom. And then we'll draw a fin on the side to help this fish navigate these tricky waters. Our fish also needs a mouth to eat, so I'll give our fish some lips. And then I'm just going to give our fish an eye so it can see all of the other fish around it. All right, so I'll give you a few more moments to finish drawing your fish. Again, this is just a quick sketch. You're welcome to come back to this portrait later and draw a little bit more closely. As I'm erasing, I just want to mention that the artist Hope Gingloff, she didn't really paint fish before she painted this portrait. And she spent hours at the aquarium trying to see how these fish moved through the water and the colors that they were. All right, so Debbie, as we're going to the next portrait, were there any comments or questions about Julie Packard that we should address?
I think you answered them all. We got them.
Okay. Awesome. All right, so detectives, we have one last portrait to look at. And the sitters that we'll be looking at are also, I've spent a lot of their life in California, but these sitters, they lived a while ago. Most of their work, or what they're known for, was about 50 and 40 years ago. And for this portrait, I'd like for us to play another little game, one that you might be familiar with called I Spy. Okay, so I'd like for you to look really carefully, again, from the top to bottom, side to side, and looking for the things that you see in this portrait. So if you'd like to write in the chat, you don't have to write I spy with my little I. You can just write the things that you see. If you don't want to type, you're welcome to just share it out loud, because I'm sure a lot of us are seeing many of the same things. All right, and Debbie, feel free to just jump on in when there are friends and portrait detectives who'd like to have their observations known.
Yeah, we're getting many different responses already, Nicole, if it's okay to read those.
Yeah.
People are noticing that there are letters on the portrait and wondering maybe if those are related to the people's names. We have others noticing not only faces, the big faces, but maybe that there are some tiny faces in the background. And someone is even saying they see an animal, maybe a bird.
Excellent. Wonderful work, portrait detectives, that you found the 5 large faces in this portrait. But also, as you looked a little bit closer, you saw that this entire portrait is made up of even more faces. You'll also notice that there is an animal or an eagle at the very top of this portrait, and that the artist really wants us to know who the sitters or who the people are in this portrait. So much so that the artist, Alfredo Araguin, has painted the names of our sitters right next to their faces. So up here at the top with the blue face here, we see the word Hidalgo. Right, so we have Hidalgo up here and then Morelos on the other side. And these 2 sitters who are at the top of the portrait, Hidalgo and Morelos, they were very important people during Mexico's fight for independence. Okay, all right, and as we move further down to our next sitter, who's wearing green, red, and white, his name is Zapata. You can see that written right here. And Emiliano Zapata, he also, like Hidalgo and Morelos, lived in Mexico. However, Zapata, he fought for the rights of many workers in Mexico. So you can see there are some similarities between the people on the top, Hidalgo and Morelos, who lived in Mexico, and Zapata, who also lived in Mexico, who fought for people's rights, meaning kind of for what was fair. As we move further down, you'll notice 2 other names. Chavez, right here. This is Cesar Chavez. Cesar Chavez I was very close friends with the other sitter and the final sitter that we see in this portrait, Dolores. And here, Dolores Huerta has a beautiful pink flower in her hair. And these 2 sitters are the ones that I'd like for us to really focus in on today. So we talked about how there were connections between Hidalgo, Morelos, and Zapata, but actually all of the sitters in this portrait have something in common. Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, they both work for many farm workers in the United States, specifically Mexican American and Filipino American farm workers. At the time when they were doing a lot of their work to help these farm workers, the farm workers were being treated very unfairly. Oftentimes they did not have any water to drink as they were working to harvest or to gather a lot of the food that was growing in the fields, that sometimes they would get sick or they wouldn't be paid a right amount of money. And so Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, they joined together to help these farm workers. And they chose a symbol to represent their organization, the United Farm Workers of America. And they chose this eagle that we see up here. Right, it's really interesting. There's a lot of other people who have chosen an eagle to represent themselves. If we think to the United States, our national bird is an eagle, but here this eagle, or a thunderbird, represents the strength and courage of the Mexican American farm workers, or just all of the farm workers that Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta helped. All right,
Nicole, our friend Dylan is sharing that it looks like an ancient eagle cave painting.
Excellent observation. I love how you're looking at the artistic style. And that's actually the next clue that we're going to look at. So that maybe it looks like a cave painting, maybe it looks like another type of artwork that we've seen before. Excellent observation. So we're going to zoom in a little bit closer so you can see all of the faces that make up this entire portrait. You'll notice these faces are on a grid, meaning that there's all of these little squares that are all lined up together, both sideways and up and down. And the artist Alfredo Araguin, he chose this symbol of these faces because it reminded him of traditional Aztec art. So Aztec art was art that was created hundreds and thousands of years ago in modern day Mexico. So these faces are all joining together these 5 larger important figures in the portrait. All right. Any other observations that have come through in the chat, Debbie?
We did just have a question about a follow-up from the flower in Dolores Huerta's hair. If you knew anything more about that you could share.
Oh, that is a really excellent observation. And actually, I do not know. I don't know about that flower. Maybe it's perhaps like the other elements of this portrait to maybe show her Mexican American heritage, but I don't know for certain. But that's a really great, excellent observation. All right, so detectives, we need to record our final clue. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit here and pull up my virtual detective notebook. If you could get out your pencil and paper. We are going to draw here one of the clues that told us about the artistic style, meaning what this artwork looked like. Many of you mentioned that some of the elements of this portrait reminded you of other artworks that you've seen, maybe perhaps cave paintings or other artworks. So I'm going to choose to draw one of the Aztec faces that make up the entire portrait. So to start, you'll notice that these faces are all a square shape. Okay, so we can start with a square. And then within that square, you'll notice that there are lines to create, oh, excuse me, let me get my pencil out. There are lines that connect from one side of the square to the other to create triangles in all the corners. Okay, and all of these faces are so unique. So you could choose to look at a face that you see in the portrait, or you could follow along with me. I'm going to choose to draw one of the faces that I see right to the side of Emilio Zapata's head. There are 2 eyes that are shaped like the letter D, but on its side. And then the mouth is kind of like an almond shape. And then I'm going to create a nose with a long letter U that connects up to both of those letter Ds. And you'll notice some of these faces have mustaches, some of them have eyelashes. You can add whatever you'd like to your face. I'm going to choose to add some eyelashes to mine and a mustache. Okay. All right, so all of these faces, we don't know who these people are. Some people have interpreted, meaning they have said that maybe these faces represent all of the people that Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta that they helped during their life. And I really like that idea or that interpretation. All right, so detectives, I just wanted to give you a very, very big thank you. I so appreciated all of your comments and observations and all of your detective work today. Debbie will put a link to this Learning Lab collection in the chat. So if you would like to visit this with your grown-ups, you are more than welcome to do so. You'll notice that there are many, many portraits here that you can search for a lot of those clues that we've talked about, like the background, the pose, the setting, all of those things. So before we end, I would love to hear from you. If you'd like, in the chat, if you could write your favorite portrait that we looked at today. So just a reminder, we looked at a portrait of Barack Obama. We also looked at a portrait of Julie Packard, the marine biologist, as well as a portrait of Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. So if you'd like, you can put those in the chat. And then Debbie, were there any other comments that you noticed that we should maybe address?
Nope, we've put the link to the Learning Lab in the chat for everyone to take a look at when they're able to. And we are getting a lot of votes for the Obama portrait. Our Chicago contingent has voted strongly.
Excellent, excellent work. Well, we hope to see you again, Portrait Detectives, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.